Welcome to the grand reopening of the Los Alamos History Museum. It is fantastic to have all of you here today. And, you know, we can say a lot about Los Alamos history. We can call it world-changing, because it is. We can say we are a small town with big history, because we are. And we can quote American presidents about our importance. And in fact, when you visit our new orientation gallery in the museum in a few minutes, you will see what those presidents said about our importance and our history. For the Los Alamos Historical Society, that history is all about people. And so seeing so many of you here today makes that, it validates what we are doing. It is about the community that has been created here from the ancestral Pueblo times through today. It is about the trials and tribulations of the homesteaders, about the strength and determination of the boys and the staff at the Los Alamos Ranch School, the brilliance and resolve of the scientists, engineers, and other workers of the Manhattan Project that extended into the Cold War. As a community, a real town was created out of a muddy army base. We are so privileged as an organization at the Los Alamos Historical Society to be the caretakers of all of this history. And even more privileged to have so many of you here today who have been part of this endeavor with us. Over the next few hours, you will see, hear, touch, and experience all of this history in new ways. To undertake what we have in the last several years is one of those projects that literally takes hundreds of people to make possible. We will not be able to thank all of them out loud here today, but when we do have our reception following the ribbon cutting in a while, please do take a few minutes to look at the posters that we have in the entryway and see the hundreds of people who have made all of this possible. I also have a few housekeeping things to discuss at the end of our time before we go over to the ribbon cutting. But for now, I want to thank you for being here. And without further ado, I would like to introduce the president of the best board of directors of any organization anywhere, Michael Wheeler.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, I'm not sure that's deserved. However, we do have a great board of directors. Just a few brief comments I wanted to make, and first of all, acknowledge we do have some local elected officials here today who you'll be hearing from later. Rick Reese over here, the chairman of the county council. Pete Sheehy, another one of our county councilors. And Sharon Stover, who's the county clerk. We also have the county represented by Steve Lynn, the deputy county administrator, back in the back. So without these important partnerships with the county, with the DOE and the lab, with the national parks, we wouldn't be here today. And this has been such an amazing year that really started 4 years ago or more, and Denny will tell you about that a little later. But this is kind of the climax of 4 or 5 years of really hard work by not just the board and the staff, but a huge number of volunteers and donors, which we'll be thanking throughout the day. And then finally, I just wanted to say that the board and the staff of the Los Alamos Historical Society has just done a great job. And if you would the staff please stand up? You'll recognize them today. They all mostly have their black shirts on. And most of our board is here today. And would you all stand, please? And with that, I'll give it back to Heather, and she'll make another introduction.
Thank you, Mike. It is up as high as it goes. So we just have to, everybody, all of our speakers need to eat the microphone, as they say. So our next speaker, I think this is his last official duty as chair of the county council, but Rick Reese is not just a talking head politician. In fact, Rick's family, at a fundraiser we had last fall, purchased the very first tour of the new museum. And we were able to do that last week and just had a wonderful time going through with his family. His daughter's getting her PhD in history, so it was a great experience for all of us. So I think this means more to Rick than just the political part for what he's here for. We do have a wonderful partnership with the county. Of course, they own the Guest Cottage, which is a stunning building that you will see, oldest continuously used building in Los Alamos. And so Rick's going to talk to us about that.
Thank you, Heather. Did you guys notice how small Mike's notes were on his speech? Well, now you got a politician, and I brought a book. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests. Perkins family, thank you, all of you, for being here. On behalf of the County Council, it's an honor to be here with you today at this ceremony to celebrate the renovation, the remodeling, and the reopening of the Los Alamos Historical Museum. With me today, and from the past and current councils, are Mike Wheeler and his lovely wife, Kyle, Fran Birding, Nancy Bartlett, Roger Waterman, who serves even today on the board of the Historical Society, Sharon Stover, and current counselors Pete Sheehy, and others who aren't able to be with us, like James Krobosinski, Kristen Henderson, who I wish was here, and I know that she's missing it, but she's in California with family. Steve Gerens, David Israelovitz, and Susan O'Leary, and soon to be Chris Chandler, who also served in the past, and Antonio Majori. All of the politicians are very, very excited about what's going on today. Today's event is all about preserving the history of our community and telling others of our story, from the ancestral Pueblo people to the homestead days on the plateau, to the ranch school era, and of course, the well-known Manhattan Project. You know, there's an old saying about those who forget history. And I don't remember what it is, but it's a really good saying. Sorry. I actually have handlers that make me remember things. For residents and fans of the History Museum like me, who have watched the interior and exterior work taking place on Bathtub Row on these buildings through all 4 seasons, and by the way, the 4 seasons are sun, rain, wind, and snow. This is a day that we've looked forward to for a long time. And I was especially impressed with the Ranch School Guest Cottage for the county's part in that project. I'm going to rattle off a list of improvements. Replacing the wood log exterior facing, replacing many of the wood log columns to keep that roof up, reworking the upper stone porch, replacing the ramp, changing the entrance to the cottage, refurbishing the interior, adding a ramp so that visitors can go to the north addition, replacing the heating system and adding refrigerated air to make the building more comfortable, replacing the entire electrical system and the restroom, refurbishing the exterior doors and windows, creating a small patio in front of the cottage, and making some landscaping improvements. And it still looks original. We think that's pretty good. Beyond the laundry list of engineering and architectural improvements, however, I can personally tell you how great it looks both inside and out. As Heather mentioned, I had the opportunity to take a personal tour. And I got to see the cottage and the Hans Beta house, and I'm very impressed. My daughter and her family joined me, which is always emotional if they come to visit me. You know, it's like I thought maybe they'd never come back. But anyway, my daughter's working on a history doctorate, and with a close eye to detail, She commented on the seamless preservation of the past with the integration of the interactive displays. She also mentioned the obvious quality and excitement of the staff, in particular Judith and Heather. Demonstrating the draw to interact with the displays, my 7-year-old granddaughter wrote a comment in the Manhattan Project room. This was the second comment on the wall, I believe. And somebody, I'm told, already asked, who did the kid thing on the wall? Who mimicked a kid? Well, it wasn't a mimic. It was my granddaughter, who I'm very proud to say, wrote, I believe that scientists have to protect what they make. Be sure that they protect it from people who want to use it badly. Insightful. The spelling was really bad. Congratulations on a job well done by County Project Manager Wayne Coldrest and his project team, Heather and her staff, Mark and the Historical Society on doing the heavy lifting for exhibits and displays, the designers, the contractors, and everyone who pitched in to make this project a reality. Let's thank them again. I would like to add that the county renovations and expanded interactive displays from the Historical Society work in tandem to support the county's top priority goal, which is increasing tourism at the home of the Manhattan Project National Historic Park. I actually heard the National Park Service say that. This was the home. We're making great progress so far, and I'd like to just reflect on what's happened in recent years that makes this all very possible. The redevelopment of this area and Bathtub Row as a new historic campus located on the edge of downtown. The county's improvements of Central Avenue and Ashley Pond Park. It's beautiful over there. The archives in the new municipal building that allowed archives to be properly stored. The bronze Oppenheimer and Grove statues. Dr. Oppenheimer will be speaking later at that microphone. The multi-year phased restoration project to bring this building back to its beautiful original condition. A move that gave the county the ability to finance and combine contract work to make the renovations of the guest cottage, along with updating the downtown historical tour, launching a new app by Lannel to give a virtual glimpse of the days and times of the Manhattan Project of Los Alamos. Wow, it is a long list, and if you stop and consider everything that we, as a community, not just the county, have accomplished in a very short period of time, I think I speak for all of us on council when I tell you we're very pleased and excited to be part of these efforts, and to watch everything to come together and attend events like this one, especially for me. What a wonderful way to end 2016. And I believe 2017 is going to be a great year for partnerships also. We'll be offering true tourist-centered experience for our new national park here on our historical campus ahead of launching the tours across the bridge, the Lannel site, which is our long-term plan. I would personally like to thank you, Heather, and her staff and volunteers who helped the county and the National Park Service over the last year in welcoming and educating visitors to our Manhattan Project National Historic Visitor Center located at the community building just across the street. The center served as a temporary home for the Historical Society. They didn't get to put out near as many things as they've got in the new, back in their new facility. And while those renovations were underway, we needed a solution in staffing the center with very little notice when the park opened. And they stepped right up, and it was a great fit because they could show their stuff and welcome people to our community. It's an example of how the county and the Historical Society works together and come up with a win-win situation. Thank you, Heather, for everything that you and the Historical Society are doing to support our community. In short, partnerships work, and thanks to you. Let's give her a round of applause. And I'd like to invite you to take a peek at the Manhattan Project Visitor Center. And also, I'd like for you to come back in a month or so when we rededicate this building with all of the changes that we've made here. Heather, thank you for inviting us. Thank you for letting me blabber. That was the longest part of the evening or the morning, so we might get to lunch yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. I just want to remind everyone that it takes a very big team to make anything like this happen. Our next speaker was so fascinated by the Manhattan Project that he became a physicist. Then he moved to Southern California, where I believe he realized he would make a lot more money as a real estate developer instead of a physicist. And we're glad he did. He became a Manhattan Project collector and decided that he would like to have his name on a deed with a Bathtub Row home. And we're glad he did that as well. Clay Perkins has enabled the Historical Society to expand up Bathtub Row into what we call the historic Hans Bethe House. We have added the Harold Agnew Cold War galleries to this facility, and now Clay is going to say a few words.
I've left my overcoat on for those of you who were not here last night. The button here says Los Alamos Project FD for fire department. This is an original coat from 1948 or 49. I don't remember the exact date. And it belonged to Harold Agnew, and he gave it to me. And it's a thing that goes way back to the same period when I first came to Los Alamos. I was here in 1947 or 48 down in Frijoles Canyon in a boys club. And we were driven up on the mountain and we could look down at the secret city. I didn't get in it, but I got close by. I, as Heather mentioned, got interested in physics because of the type of things in Look magazine, Life magazine, explaining how the atomic bomb worked. And that seemed really neat. And I followed it ever since, even though I went into aerospace and sort of a rocket scientist. But I've always followed the Los Alamos part of the Manhattan Project primarily. And it's given me a great deal of fun, a lot more than anything I've contributed. Thank you.
Clay, thank you to you and your family for all that you have done. Our next speaker is our museum director. Now, I would like you to imagine two construction projects that are going on simultaneously. One is taking place in Maryland with a bunch of artistic, creative people, and one is taking place in Los Alamos with an engineer who is very focused on the building, but doesn't necessarily think a lot about the museum. And the person who had to oversee and bring those two construction projects together is our museum director, Judith Stauber.
Thank you. It's a beautiful view from up here. You should turn around and look. Thank you for being here to celebrate with us today. Over the past year and a half, our exhibit team logged thousands of hours working with our design partner in Maryland, Quatrefoil Associates. They've done some pretty remarkable projects, ours the most recent. It's been an intense and creative experience, the kind of project you get to work on once in a lifetime, if you're lucky. Together, we shaped every phase of the design process, from initial concepts to final installation. We edited scripts, we chose artifacts and oral histories. We developed new storytelling methods, and we designed exhibits to feature multiple perspectives and first-person narratives. We developed interactives to engage imaginations and spark critical thinking. Along the way, many of you know this, we shared all of our progress in open and very lively community meetings. Heather and I were joined on the exhibit team by these delightful people who I'm going to ask to stand. Mark Rayburn. Heather, you can stand too, please. Ron Wilkins, Amy Slaughter, Sharon Snyder, Stephanie Yeamans. This is our team. For the last 18 months, Thank you. Thank you to our hardworking exhibit design team. I can't believe we're done. Our history museum, it's important to note, would not be the same today with all of our donors, but it wouldn't be anything that it is without our director emeritus. So I'm going to embarrass Hetty Dunn, and please ask her to stand up and come here. Hetty, this person was our museum director for decades. She now serves as our director emeritus on our board and is involved every day in everything that we do, and we wouldn't be here without her. Thank you. Thank everyone here as well for everything you've done for community history in Los Alamos. Thanks.
Our next speaker has been president of the Los Alamos Historical Society, co-chair of our multi-million-dollar fundraising campaign, and a wonderful friend and mentor, Denny Erickson.
Thank you, Heather. This is truly an exciting day, and as I've told other people, it takes a lot to excite me, and I am truly excited. I want to do two things. I want to tell a quick story that sets the stage for what we're about to do across the way with the ribbon cutting. And then I want to make some introductions to some special people and families that are part of the story of getting here. The story starts with a retreat that we hold annually with the Society leadership, and we do it every June. 10 years ago, in June of 2010, we met in Dorothy McKibben's house in Santa Fe, which is now a privately owned house. There were probably 20 of us, and we had a facilitator that guided us through a strategic planning process. In order to go someplace, you have to have dreams and aspirations and directions. And a lot of us go through these exercises, and they're interesting for a time, and usually nothing much comes out of these exercises. But this one was special, and it set the stage for the society to go to the next level, to a national level, to a place that attracted both national visitors as well as international visitors, and to establish its place in the history of this country, and in fact in the history of the world. So those aspirations were set, directions were taken. They had to do with expanding facilities, and you've heard some of the places that we've moved into. It had to do with overhauling our exhibits and whatever, and we're going to see some of that this morning. It had to do with adding staff to have a more comprehensive and energetic organization. You got to have people and expertise to make that happen. We had to have places to put our things, our archives, our collections that were upstairs in the second floor of this building and up in the attic, and they were finally moved several years ago. And we needed many things. We also knew that there was the potential, and it was up and down potential, that there might be a multi-sited national Manhattan Project National Historical Park. And we coupled our aspirations with the potential for that, but whether that happened or not made little difference as to what we were going to do as an organization. So given those aspirations and dreams, we went ahead and crafted paths forward. But in order to do what we needed to do, we needed funds to do it. It always gets down to whether you've got the cash to follow your dreams and aspirations. So 4 years ago, we committed as a historical society to a fundraising campaign called History is Here. We brought in a consultant, Compass Incorporated, to guide us through the process. And from time to time, you've heard about what we've been able to do. So at this point in this campaign, with a target of $7 million, we managed to raise $4.2 million of pledges and future commitments. And there's enough in those current contributions to do what we needed to do over the next few years. We've in fact added staff. We've in fact implemented our archival facility in the new municipal building. We've in fact overhauled our exhibits, as you're going to see this morning. We have in fact expanded our campus museum, and it's now in several buildings rather than one, and it'll go even farther as we go forward. The confidence to have a campaign like this, which is really a precedent setting for this community, were some of the early gifts that we've gotten preceding this. Helene and Jerry Saddam, with their contribution of the house that they have lived in and Helene still lives in, the so-called Oppenheimer House, was given to the society several years ago. The Reines family, in recognition of their dad and their mom, Fred Reines, the Nobel Prize winning discoverer of the neutrino, also gave a significant gift to the society several years ago. And then Beth Plossman, who many of us know as both a friend and a colleague, contributed a significant gift in her estate. And it gave us confidence and kind of a start that we could do what we needed to do. So taking those gifts and the money raised in this History is Here campaign, which we're going to conclude as of today, it is over $5 million worth of significant contributions that have made all kinds of things to happen. So those of us that are in this building today, and there's a poster that lists all the people that have made contributions to this campaign. Thank you so much. And then just to finish this brief comment, I want to introduce several families that are what we call foundation givers. They're families from outside of this community, although they all have connections to Los Alamos. The first one is the family of Harold and Beverly Agnew. Harold died in 2013, and Beverly died a few years before that. But what we have today, this weekend, are one of the two children, Nancy Agnew Chapman and her husband Alan, and they have brought their children and their brother, Nancy's brother John's children and grandchildren here to Los Alamos to be part of this time. And there have been lots of memorabilia coming out of the Agnews that have been sent forward since the death of the two parents. So if the Agnew family, Nancy, if you would rise with your family and let us recognize you. So for Nancy, welcome home. And then you've heard from Clay Perkins. Clay and Dorothy, over maybe the last 10 years or even longer, have become really special friends of Los Alamos and the society. And you've heard Clay's story about the backstory of why he has this interest. But they have been such great friends. And the last couple of visits here, they have, in fact, brought their family as well. So if Clay and Dorothy would rise with their son David and their daughter-in-law Esther and the three grandchildren, please give this family a round of applause. And then the final family that comes from elsewhere are Doug and Lee Konak, and they're coming from Chicago. Doug is the former president and CEO of Campbell's Soup. He's now a Northwestern University professor and the chair of the Kellogg Executive Leadership Institute. They have several connections to Los Alamos. One is that Doug is a cousin of Jeanette Conant, the author and historian of 109 East Palace. But perhaps more significantly for Los Alamos is that Doug has an uncle that he never knew, Horace Russell Jr. Horace was brought here, we think, by Robert Oppenheimer during the Manhattan days. He was a young metallurgist at Caltech and already distinguished. He wrote a textbook that was printed and reprinted many times and used, may still be used for all I know, and was convinced to come to Los Alamos. Doug told me this story last night that Oppenheimer told Horace that he needed to socialize. Horace didn't drink. He wasn't real excited about the parties and whatever that went on, but he needed to do something to relax. So he suggested that he take up horseback riding, which he did. We think he bought a horse. He unfortunately fell from his horse and died from the fall, and never made it through the accomplishments of what happened here during that very special period. Doug and Lee have these special connections to this community. They've been back here several times. This time they brought their family as well. So if Doug and Lee and their family would please rise and let us welcome you. And then to end this, you know, we've heard about all the people that it takes to make something happen. To dream, to aspire, to plan, to raise the money, to do all these things. What I'd like to do is ask the people that have been the steering committee for this History is Here campaign to rise, including my co-chair, the distinguished Los Alamos personage Sharon Stover, and our steering committee, and then I'm not sure whether we've got any of our honorary chairs in the audience. John Hopkins might be here. So if you would, please rise and let us recognize you as well. And then my concluding comment is that all the people that have been recognized this morning have worked together in partnership and expectation and have delivered on the dreams, the aspirations, and the promises. And I think all of these people, most of us have been volunteers. I think this community, and in fact, I think the country, owes a debt of gratitude to all the people that you've seen represented this morning. So thank you very much. This is an exciting time. We're in for some more excitement as we go forward this morning. Thank you.
One bit of housekeeping. Is Jim Dinkle here?
You should be right now. See if
I don't know if, oh, here he comes. Denny, I think Jim has something for you.
So I'm told that Jim Dinkle, who is the one of the accounting companies in the community, has something to give to the Historical Society and in fact relevant to the History is Here campaign. Jim?
Thank you very much. I'm the personal representative for Dr. Irene Boone and Sim Boone, and in their will, they left the Historical Society as one of their beneficiaries. And I have a check here for $100,000, and that goes together with another $250,000 already given. So I would literally like to thank the Boones so that we can all enjoy the museum.
Hold on to that. We've got a bank bag. There you go. Thank you. And it's just, wonderful people throughout our history. I think many of you knew the Boones and what the history of this community meant to them, and to have them as part of this. We have a legacy society. And if you are interested in doing what the Boones did, you need to see Lee Deanna or myself, and we'll be happy to talk with you about that. Our final speaker this morning, we are so honored to have with us. There's a sort of disdain, I think, that journalists and historians have for each other. And Clifton and I both come from a journalism background. We both, historians and journalists, think each other gets it wrong. But sometimes the call of history does call to people, and I think we have both also felt that call. Me because this is of this building, actually, and Clifton because of who his grandfather is. We are linked together because Harry Truman was president during the Manhattan Project and did make that fateful decision to use the weapons that were created here. And it is, as I say, just this call of history that brings us together. And so it is with great pleasure and honor I'd like to introduce to you Clifton Truman Daniel.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. What's the old adage on the stage? It's never a good idea to follow children or dogs or large checks. I'm basically moot point here. Congratulations on that, by the way. My grandfather, as I think many of you know, he thought history was very important. And when you're a small child around him, well, you have to be careful. Early in my life, my grandfather was visiting us in New York, where I grew up, and he always got up at the crack of dawn. He was up at 5 or 5:30, went for a walk, ate breakfast, came over to our apartment from his hotel with a bunch of newspapers, dropped them on the floor, and started reading, waiting for somebody to wake up. And my brother and I were down first thing that morning, and he was behind the newspaper, so he didn't see us. And we started to tiptoe into the den to watch television. And he caught us. And he said, "Where do you think you're going?" And I said, "Into the den to watch Bugs Bunny." And he said, "You don't want to do that." And I thought, yes, I do. That's why we were tiptoeing. And he said, "I have a much better idea." And he went between us. He walked between us into the den. He reached up on the top shelf and he took down a book. And he came back out and he said, "Come here and sit down." He didn't argue with Harry Truman, so we sat down. And he opened the book and started to read. And my mother came down a little while later and stopped cold at the bottom of the stairs. She'd never seen anything like this in her life. Both of her sons are sitting there stock still, not moving, in their footy pajamas, while her father read to us from a book that didn't have any pictures in it. And she said, "What are you reading to those kids?" And he showed her the cover of the book. It was Thucydides, History of the Peloponnesian War. At 6 o'clock in the morning, to a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. So you had to be very careful around him. I actually did not know that my grandfather had been president of the United States because no one in my family told me. I found out in school. I went to school one morning and my teacher said, "Wasn't your grandfather president?" "I don't know. I'll go home and ask." And I did. I went home. My mother loved to tell this story for years. I went home and I dropped my book bag at the door and I marched over to my mother and I put my hands on my hips and I said, "Mom, did you know?" And she said, "Yes, but remember something. Any little boy's grandfather can be president. Don't let it go to your head." It didn't go to my head. It went right over my head. I was 6. My daughter, Amy, Amy's 29 now. When she was 6 years old, we were watching television together, trying to find something that the two of us could watch. And I landed on a biography of my grandfather, and I said, "Amy, that man right there, that's Harry S. Truman. He was the 33rd President of the United States of America. He was your great-grandfather." And she said, "Daddy, go back. You passed Nickelodeon." I didn't even, that stopped cold right there. Amy is still sort of like that, by the way. We were at a historic symposium at the Little White House in Key West a few years ago, and the director of the Truman Library said, "Are you looking forward to the symposium tomorrow?" And Amy said, "No, I'm just here because it's Key West." At which point the director said, "You sound just like your grandmother." My grandfather himself, I didn't really realize what it meant to be president for another year. And it took seeing Lyndon Johnson in his pajamas. We had been, my mother had been one of the hostesses at the inaugural balls at Mr. Johnson's inauguration in early 1965. And we had breakfast with the Johnsons in the White House afterwards, my whole family, my younger brother and myself, and my father and mother. And we lost track of time because we're sitting in the White House having breakfast with the President and the First Lady. And we weren't paying attention, and my father suddenly jumped up and said, "We have a train to catch, we need to go." And the President said, "Oh, Cliff, relax. The train will wait." And my father said, "Yeah, for you." And he said, sit down, you got plenty of time." So my dad sat down, and we lost track of time again. And by the time we hopped up again, it was after 10 o'clock. We were finished. We ran to the car. Even as we drove through the gates, my parents were arguing about, well, what do we do next? When's the next train? What do we do? Stay overnight? We didn't notice that the train had pulled in, not to the front of Union Station, but onto a platform in the back. And on the platform was a red cap with a baggage cart and a conductor with his watch out and a train. And my father started throwing the bags at the red cap, and the conductor said, "Relax, relax. You had plenty of time. The White House called." Mr. Johnson had stopped the train. And my father and I had two very different reactions to that. Dad's was, "Well, why didn't he tell me he was going to do that? I wouldn't have worried all the way over here." My reaction, the 7-year-old reaction, was, "Wow. My grandfather could stop trains." And what happened, I'm sure for 2 weeks after that, I became insufferable, which was exactly what my parents were trying to avoid and my grandfather was trying to avoid. He would have been horrified that I went around school telling everybody that my grandfather could stop trains. He himself did not look at the presidency that way. It was a set of tools for him to use, and he was happy to give them back when it was over and go back to what he said was a step up in this country, which was being an American citizen. Everybody else is supposed to work for us, whether it seems that way at times or not. My grandfather, when it comes to Los Alamos, he was actually sort of looking for this place back in 1942. He was the head of the Truman Committee, investigating waste and fraud in military spending. And it wasn't specifically Los Alamos, but it was the big guys. It was Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Hanford, Washington. And he was getting reports that millions and millions of dollars were pouring into the middle of nowhere. I actually take that back. It wasn't nowhere. It was family farms. It was farmland. It was mountains and valley, just disappearing. So he started to send 2 inspectors out. And Secretary of War Henry Stimson had to take him aside and say, "Stop that, please. It's legitimate and it's top secret." This being 1942, in the middle of a war, Grandpa said, "Sure. Yeah, not a problem, of course." And I can't help but think that when Stimson took him aside after Roosevelt died and told him that we had a new weapon, I can't help but think that the light bulb must have gone off immediately for my grandfather, realizing that what he had almost stepped into 3 years earlier was in fact coming to fruition. He would love Los Alamos today. He would love what you all have done here. When he built his presidential library, he did not want a monument to himself. He wanted a place where people could learn about the presidency, learn about U.S. history, learn about world history. He didn't want big statues all over the place featuring Harry Truman. So he would love what you've done here. He would love your commitment, that you've raised the money that you've raised, that you all care so much about this place, that you involve families, that you keep it going through the generations, and that you all, frankly, are kind of relaxed and keep a sense of humor about this. And also that you tell the story with pride, but also with empathy for the other side, learning about all sides. You tell it with pride and empathy and open minds. And that's invaluable. And you've got a beautiful site to do this with. I'm actually sort of jealous. Truman Library sits on top of a hill next to a highway. I mean, in Missouri is nice, but this is gorgeous up here. So you've got a real jewel here, and you're taking care of it beautifully. My grandfather, you're very much yourselves here. You get a great sense of community in this place. And it reminds me of my grandfather. And I'll tell you one of my favorite stories about he was always accessible. I mean, back in the day, the presidents could be. They can't anymore. But back in the day, they could be. Grandpa, in retirement even, was always accessible, always liked people, always willing to share a story, always loved to talk about history. All the things that you all are doing here. And I'll tell you a story. When he retired, there was no Secret Service protection. It's early 1953. Secret Service didn't come along for my grandfather until after John F. Kennedy was assassinated. So he pretty much just went home to Missouri, to the house he'd lived in all of his marriage. There's a 5-foot black steel fence around the property, but it wasn't locked. The Secret Service left and gave him the key and said, good luck. We're going to go protect Eisenhower now. So they left, and he had, I think for years, he had a retired Kansas City police lieutenant, Mike Westwood, just drove him around, took care of him from time to time, but not the Secret Service protection would come later. So anybody could walk up to my grandfather's house in the 1950s. And in the mid-50s, apparently a man was driving by the house, his car broke down. And the guy didn't know where he was. There was no sign in those days that said Harry Truman's house. There is now. But there was in the 1950s. So this guy, he stopped in front of the house and, of course, walked up the steps and rang the doorbell. He was in trouble. And my grandfather answered the door in his shirt sleeves. And the guy said, my car's broke down. Can I use your phone? And my grandfather said, well, sure, come on in. So the guy called the garage from the front hall. And the garage said, well, it's going to take us 15 or 20 minutes. And the man said, that's all right, I'll wait by the car. And my grandfather said, no, don't do that. Sit down, relax. And they sat in the living room and talked for 15 or 20 minutes. And finally, the garage driver showed up, and the guy stood up, and he shook my grandfather's hand. And he said, thank you. I appreciate the help and the hospitality. It was nice talking to you. And Grandpa said, likewise. I hope everything works out okay and it's not too expensive. And the guy walked out the front door, and he got halfway down the steps, and he stopped. And he turned, and he looked back up, and he said, you know something? And I hope you don't take offense at this, but you look an awful lot like that SOB Harry Truman. And my grandfather just smiled at him and said, I am that SOB Harry Truman. So you all are very wonderfully and uniquely yourselves. You are Los Alamos. You are the history. You keep it going. And if you keep this up, I can guarantee you that you will remain a jewel in the history of this country and of the world for a long, long time to come. Thank you.
Wow. And now we get to go see the museum.
2, 1.
Two scissors.
All right. Now we can. You have to go. Good. We're good.